In 1999, NASA lost a spacecraft worth $327 million, not to a malfunction, not to an asteroid, not to any failure of science or physics. They lost it because one team used metric units and another used Imperial. A spacecraft designed to orbit Mars instead skimmed too close to the planet's atmosphere and burned up, gone, because of inches and centimeters. Now here's the question nobody asks out loud. If something that simple can destroy a Mars mission, what else is it quietly destroying? Right now, there are two invisible systems running parallel on this planet. Two completely different ways of measuring everything: distance, weight, temperature, volume. Most of the world uses one. One country, almost alone, uses the other. The metric system and the imperial system. On the surface, this sounds like a boring math debate, the kind of thing your teacher droned on about in middle school. But pull back the curtain, and this is actually a story about empire, revolution, power, and control. It's a story about why the most powerful nation on earth refuses to change, even when it costs lives, money, and missions to other planets. And it raises a question that gets stranger the deeper you go. Is the measurement system you grew up with quietly shaping the way you think? For most of human history, measurement was personal, literally. The foot was the length of a king's foot, the inch was the width of a man's thumb, an acre was how much land one man with one ox could plow in a single day. These weren't arbitrary, they were practical, they were human scaled. But here's the problem: whose foot, whose thumb, which man? A merchant in London and a merchant in Paris couldn't agree on how long a yard was. Trades collapsed, disputes escalated, people were cheated constantly, and had no way to prove it. By the 1700s, Europe was a measurement nightmare. France alone had over 250,000 different units of measurement. 250,000. A single country, hundreds of thousands of ways to measure the same thing. Something had to break. And in 1789, something did. The French Revolution didn't just overthrow a monarchy, it tried to overthrow reality itself. The revolutionaries wanted to erase every trace of the old world, including the king's foot. They commissioned scientists to build something radical: a measurement system based not on human bodies or royal decree, but on the Earth itself. They measured the distance from the North Pole to the equator, divided it by 10 million, and called that length 1 meter. Simple, universal, permanent. The metric system was born, not from convenience, but from revolution. Meanwhile, across the English Channel, Britain wasn't interested in French revolutionary ideas. They had their own system, built from centuries of trade, tradition, and empire. And as the British Empire expanded across the globe, so did imperial measurement. America, colonized by Britain, inherited the system, and unlike almost everyone else, it never let go. By the 20th century, the rest of the world was quietly converting. Country by country, decade by decade, the metric system spread. The United Kingdom officially adopted it. Canada converted in the 1970s, Australia, India, Japan, Brazil, one by one. Until today, only three countries in the world officially use the imperial system as their primary standard. Three: Myanmar, Liberia, and the United States of America. The most technologically advanced nation on the planet, still measuring distance in units named after a medieval king's body parts. Why? Here's the part of the story most people don't know. America tried to go metric. Yes, in 1975, Congress passed the Metric Conversion Act.
Just about the whole world is measuring metrically and having an easier time of it.
It was official. The United States was going metric. Road signs were being changed, schools were teaching metric, and transition had begun. And then it just stopped. The program was made voluntary. Voluntary in a country where nobody was going to volunteer to relearn everything they'd ever known. Voluntary meant never. Public backslash was enormous, people were furious, politicians didn't want to deal with it, and slowly, quietly, the transition was abandoned. But this wasn't just cultural stubbornness. There were industries, powerful, entrenched industries, built entirely around imperial measurement: construction, manufacturing, real estate, hardware. Billions of dollars in tools, blueprints, contracts, and infrastructure. Converting wasn't just inconvenient, it was expensive. Let's go back to that Mars spacecraft, the Mars Climate Orbiter. In 1999, Lockheed Martin's engineering team was using Imperial units, pound, force, seconds, to calculate thrust data. NASA's navigation team was expecting metric units, Newton, seconds. Nobody caught it. The spacecraft entered the Martian atmosphere at the wrong angle and $327 million gone. But that's not the only incident. In 1983, Air Canada Flight 143 ran out of fuel mid-flight.
The passengers on board this Boeing 767 were told even before the aircraft left the ground that the pilot was experiencing difficulties with his fuel gauges, and it took Ministry of Transport investigators only a matter of hours after they arrived on the scene to remove a component from the fuel indication system and send it down to the Honeywell Corporation in Minneapolis for analysis.
Not because of engine failure, not because of a storm, because ground crew calculated fuel weight in pounds when they should have used kilograms. The plane became a glider at 41,000 feet. By a miracle of skill and luck, the pilots managed to land the plane at a decommissioned airstrip. All 69 people on board survived, but they survived despite the confusion, not because of the system. These aren't ancient history, these are modern disasters, directly caused by having two incompatible systems trying to coexist on the same planet. And here's the unsettling part. How many smaller errors, the ones that don't make headlines, happen every single day? In hospitals, on construction sites, in pharmaceutical labs, we don't know. Because the ones that don't crash a spacecraft, nobody writes a report. Here's where this gets genuinely strange. Some cognitive scientists and linguists have explored an idea that sounds almost philosophical. Does the system you use to measure the world affect how you conceptualize it? Metric is base 10. Everything multiplies and divides cleanly. 1 kilometer equals 1,000 meters, 1 meter equals 100 centimeters. The logic is self-evident, scalable, consistent. Imperial is something else. 12 inches in a foot, 3 feet in a yard, 1,760 yards in a mile, 16 ounces in a pound, 4 quarts in a gallon, but 2 pints in a quart. There is no underlying pattern. You just memorize it. Now think about what that means. If you grow up in a metric country, mathematical relationships are intuitive. Scale is natural. Moving between units requires no mental conversion, just moving a decimal point. If you grow up in an imperial country, you learn early that the world doesn't follow clean patterns. You learn to memorize rather than derive. You accept inconsistency as normal. Is that a stretch? Maybe. But it's worth asking whether the invisible scaffolding of measurement, the framework through which you understand the physical world as a child, leaves any trace on how you think. Now let's be fair. Because this channel doesn't deal in simple villains, the metric system has its own problems. For everyday human experience, imperial units are often more intuitive. When you describe someone as 6 feet tall, most English speakers can immediately picture that person. Tell them the same person is 182.88 centimeters, the image doesn't form as fast. Fahrenheit, strange as it seems, actually maps well onto human comfort. 0 degrees Fahrenheit is very cold, 100 degrees Fahrenheit is very hot. The range almost perfectly describes the livable temperature spectrum for a human being. Celsius is rational, but 0 degrees being freezing and 100 degrees being boiling describes water, not people. There's a reason some scientists argue that the ideal system might be a hybrid, metric for technical and scientific work, and a reformed set of human-scaled units for everyday life. Others argue the entire debate misses the point, that what matters isn't which system, but whether everyone is using the same one. So here's the real picture. The metric versus imperial debate isn't actually about math. It never was. It's about identity. Imperial measurement is woven into the cultural fabric of the United States, into its language, its architecture, its sports, its recipes. Embedded in how Americans feel about distance, weight, and space. Changing it isn't like flipping a switch. It's like asking a culture to rewire its intuitions. And that's not something that happens through legislation. Meanwhile, the metric system is increasingly the language of global science, trade, and technology. The more interconnected the world becomes, the more expensive the gap grows. This isn't a debate that will be settled by logic. It will be settled, if it ever is, by cost. When the price of incompatibility finally outweighs the comfort of familiarity, something will shift, or it won't, and we will keep losing spacecrafts. There is something quietly profound about this story. We built machines that can travel to other planets, we mapped the human genome, we split the atom, and connected 8 billion people through invisible signals traveling at the speed of light. And yet, we can't agree on how long an inch is. And buried inside that disagreement is something bigger than math. It's a question about who gets to define reality, whether truth is universal or inherited, whether the frameworks we are handed as children are the ones we are supposed to question. The metric system won the world with logic. Imperial measurement held on something logic can't defeat. And maybe that's the most human thing about this entire story. We don't always choose what's rational, we choose what feels like home, even when home is built on a medieval king's foot.